Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining our JCU webinar series. My name is Jack Rowden and I work as the Alumni Relations and Development Coordinator here at JCU. So a very special shout out to our alumni amongst the audience tonight. I look forward to moderating this webinar this evening. However, before we continue, I wish to acknowledge the Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first inhabitants of this country, and I pay my respects to the traditional owners and elders, past and present, of the land on which we stand today. In the spirit of reconciliation, I also acknowledge the valuable contribution that Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples continue to make to James Cook University and the broader community. Now, this webinar is the latest in a series where we invite our top researchers and academics to share their expertise with the local community outside of the lecture theatre. So tonight we're moving away from the medical aspects of the COVID-19 crisis to explore the pandemic's impact on the digital divide amongst society. Dr. Kerry Russo is our speaker tonight. However, before I introduce her in earnest, just some housekeeping. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel. I'll be monitoring this function throughout the presentation and I'll raise your questions with Kerry when appropriate. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our sole speaker this evening. Dr. Kerry Russo is the Associate Dean of Learning and Teaching at James Cook University's College of Business, Law and Governance. Her role as Associate Dean includes leading teaching and learning approaches, working with academics to develop positive student learning experiences, and promoting student engagement approaches. Tonight, we are thrilled to have her enlighten us on the impact of the unique circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic on the digital divide in our education system. So Kerry, the floor is yours. Could the online learning program we've seen brought in by COVID-19 be our opportunity to produce digitally fluent students, or has it in fact exaggerated the digital divide? I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jack, and thank you all for coming along to this session. So this evening's session, in order to answer these questions, we really needed to unpack what was occurring during COVID. And my particular focus in this area is looking at secondary state school systems. So the ability to move our learning online during COVID-19 really came down to the types of resources that we had available within our sectors. And to start, I wanted to look at a tale of two school systems. So with School One had a learning management system. Now, a learning management system is an online platform for accessing and using learning materials within a digital curriculum. And this means that all subjects in School One were available on an online platform, and students had often been using this prior to COVID. Students in School One had digital devices, and their teachers had learnt how to embed digital technologies in their subjects. IT support was also available to these teachers. Now in School Two did not have a digital learning, learning management system, and they also didn't have a digital curriculum. They may have had a bring your own device system in place, and for students that couldn't afford a laptop for that scheme, there would be a laptop trolley available for them. Laptops in this school were rarely used. They were primarily used as word processors for students to do their assessments, and they may have been used in certain subjects across the school, but they weren't across every subject. So then, I guess I want to be very, very clear about this, is that our schools, our teachers and our students all worked incredibly hard to transition to remote and online learning during COVID. It was extraordinary circumstances, but the difference in resourcing of the two schools really illuminates the issues of the digital divide. So School One had the resources to do this quickly and efficiently. School Two did not have the necessary resources and had to scramble to allocate student laptops, internet dongles, they had to set up Google platforms. Some even had to move to paper-based activities because their students didn't have access to broadband at home. So what COVID did was actually demonstrated a significant inequity in our Australian education systems. This inequity is due to differing digital resources and the use of digital resources within schools. So with digital fluency, which is what I want to look at, and that's really what we want to extend, is digital fluency is defined as the ability to move from one platform to another with ease. A digital fluent person is able to interpret, to problem solve, to create and reformulate knowledge through the use of digital technologies. So in simple terms, digital fluency is to create rather than consume. So when I speak of consuming, in order to consume in a digital environment, and a lot of us are doing it, we could be online shopping, we could be using a social media platform such as Facebook. That's consuming. What we're looking for in particular is the ability to create within a digital environment. So Briggs and Makice came up with the idea of 4 stages of digital fluency. They define digital fluency as an ability to reach your desired outcomes with the use of technology. And they identified 4 stages. We had the anti-literacy. So the anti-literate person in the digital terms really doesn't see any value in the use of technology. They don't know how to use it and they don't really care. Then you've got the pre-literacy stage. These are the people who they know that it's of use and they would go on and they could scroll through their Facebook feed, etc. But they don't really have the digital skills that would be required. The third step is that digital literacy. Now, the digital literate person, I think, is where a lot of us sit. So we've got the skills in order to work within Excel, within Word. We kind of know our way around different digital platforms, and we have those competencies, those basic competencies that allow us to do our work. What we need within our society is a digital fluent. And the digital fluent is a person who sees the value of technology, but knows how to use it, when to use it, how to troubleshoot, how to create. So that's where we're heading within this presentation, is looking at how this could occur. But Briggs and Makice also identified 2 danger periods. The anti-literacy area, where these people don't really see the point of it, so they don't really wish to engage within a digital space. And then you've got the digital literacy person, who the digital literate is feeling quite comfortable with what they know. It's meeting their needs at the time being. So why is digital fluency so important? And it comes down to the fact that our graduates, and we are all in a 21st century workforce. In order to participate competitively in this workforce, our graduates need to be digitally fluent. And they need to be fluent because we are working within a constantly changing digital environment. And a digital fluent graduate, be they from school or from university, would be future-proofed as much as we can. So let's look at the fact that technology is changing at such a rapid rate. This graphic shows the time it takes for certain technologies to reach mass adoption, and that is defined as reaching 25% of market access. Now, the phone took around 50 years in order to get to that 25%. Radio, 38. Television, 22 years. But then suddenly we see these jumps, PCs, 14. We get to the iPod, that was 3 years where it reached mass adoption. The iPhone was 2.7 years. Facebook took 2 years in which to gain that 25% of the market. Twitter, within 9 months, Twitter was had the market within 25% of the market. But then what was really surprising was that there was a particular platform that only took 35 days in which to reach mass adoption. And that, surprisingly, was Angry Birds. Within 35 days of Angry Birds going live, 25% of the market was engaged with that product. And this diagram here shows a brief overview of the digital revolution. And again, it's showing that rapid pace of change where you've got, things were sort of like fairly easy. Email became quite by the late 90s that had started to take hold. We've got Skype came about in 2003. I mean, where would we be now without Zoom within our current work environments during COVID? But then you can see we've suddenly got a massive uptake of technologies. The iPhone was introduced in 2007, and now it's the smartphones are something that we're all walking around with, a massive computer within our back pocket. And it's been 10 years since the iPad came on the scene, and a lot of us couldn't imagine what life was like before the iPhone, before Facebook. And then this graphic ends around 2017. And, within that short space of time, we've got Alexa within our homes, we've got Apple Watches, we've got a massive uptake of artificial intelligence. And it was within this digital landscape.
Sorry, Kerry, can I just interrupt you? Just for the benefit of the audience, I will be interrupting Kerry at different times just to ask some questions as well, but feel free to go into the Q&A chat and send those questions through as well. Just in regards to the digital revolution, where do you see that revolution moving from here? And was it easier for people to become digitally fluent in the days when digital revelations were sort of further apart? And did it give more people time to go through those stages you identified before?
I do think it did. I think, it allowed us, it was at a slower pace. So we had time to get used to internet searches. We had time to get used to email. There was quite a big gap before, but then all of a sudden in the last 10 years, we started having quite significant jumps in the technology. And when we look at COVID, when we look at any kind of historically, any event of this kind, we do expect that there's going to be a significant leap in digital transformations post-COVID, where people are coming out and going, well, we don't want to go back to normal. What are we going to do now? So we do expect that it would continue. And that's why we have to have that digital fluent aspect to us.
Excellent. Thanks, Kerry.
Thank you. So it was really up against this background that we expected the digital native to be able to adapt, to evolve, to create within this landscape. And even now, I still hear people talk about the digital native, but it really was a myth. Prensky first coined the term in 2001, and he said that our students of today are going to be native speakers of a digital language, of computers, of video games, of the internet, and that we as educators would become digital immigrants within this strange land, and that we had to develop learning environments, we had to develop workplaces that would meet the needs of these digital natives, and that they would be expected to transform our workplace and our education. And whilst that is the case, in certainly there has been some changes, but ultimately the digital native did not arrive. Students may be wired and hyper-connected cohort, but social media engagement does not equate to digital fluency. And that's really been come to the fore during COVID. Certainly within our university, where we had, like the schools, 1 week in which to get everything up online. And our students who had not previously, or who had been in subjects previously where they didn't have that immersion within a digital environment, had a very steep learning curve. We've got issues where students don't know how to access a online conferencing platform. We have instances where they're having difficulties uploading to their learning management system. And what's been happening is that what is showing is that we have a falling of our digital literacies since 2011. And remember, this is the generation that we've currently got in our schools and in our universities grew up within a digital environment. Many of these students had laptops at schools. And yet we are seeing a relationship between falling digital literacies and school types.
Kerry, can I just jump in there? How just for those that aren't familiar, how do these digital literacies across a national level get measured and analysed?
So we've got the National Assessment Program, and we've also got the Program for International Student Assessment. Now, Australia's been falling in the PISA results for some time, but when Thompson, in her review of PISA, she actually identified a relationship between the falling digital literacies and the school types, and that there was a significant difference in digital literacies between private schools and state schools, and that overall has reduced that and has an impact on our falling literacies. Yeah. The other area that we've got in Australia is that we do have a segregated school system, and we have a different funding model. Now, I'm no expert on how schools are funded, and I want to be clear about that. But when I hear people talk of Finland, for instance, and people hold them up as having such a robust education system, we need to remember that Finland doesn't have private schools. They've got the one school system within their country, and therefore they're performing very well within these international assessments. So why is it so? Why is it in an increasingly hyper-connected and digital global environment, how could digital skills be in decline? Now, to me, the digital divide has been there for some time, but certainly COVID has shone a spotlight on it. It has exposed the fallacy of an egalitarian Australian society. This is how I see the digital divide. Now, a lot of focus has been on access. You know, that we don't have broadband access across everybody within Australia, that not all of our students have access to data, that not all students have ownership of a digital device. However, a lot of the focus on digital divide is starting now to move to these areas here. So we've got digital literacy, that use of skills, those basic digital competencies that a majority of us do have. But this fluency, this ability to interpret and evaluate information, to produce knowledge, is where the divide is starting to really be exposed. And this is what I feel has occurred during COVID. So we and Hyman refer to the digital divide as a difference in the use of digital technologies. They say that it is the gap of digital knowledge between the technological haves and the technological have-nots. And so the digital divide, is it socio-economically driven? Now, these are some quotes that have come out of a variety of different research that has occurred overseas, where they talk about access does not promote inclusion. So you see, in where I was coming from as an educator, where we had students coming into our Bachelor of Business program, which we were putting online, our students had access to laptops in schools. So we just assumed they would be able to easily step into that digital environment that we had set up within the business program. And that's where we started to notice that there was a significant difference between students. So a number of researchers have spoken about this inequity, that the primary indicator by one researcher was that the high digital skills and fluency was related to a high socioeconomic status. In America, they found that teachers were reluctant to engage with learning technologies unless they had the appropriate professional development and they had access to IT support staff. So then we had the Australian review of regional, rural and remote education, the Hazley report, which has recently come out. And in here, he's really exposed that Australian rural schools are often dealing with poor internet connection, old computers and software, and they also have a lack of access to teacher professional development and IT support. So even before COVID, we were identifying the issues in regards to the digital divide. And then within pre-COVID, within universities, we started thinking, well, you know, our digital learning environments that we've created, have they created a new hurdle for students? So if you've got a student who's coming in from a secondary school where they've had no access to a learning management system or a digital curriculum, and they suddenly arrive at university where everything is online, everything that they need to do is on the learning management system, they not only have to learn the new way of learning, the new life that they have at university, they also suddenly need to have skills. They need to build their skills in order to participate equally with others. So that's where we come back to COVID shining that light on inequity and the digital divide. So Broadbent, back in 2003, said, being part of a digital divide in the 20th century disconnects you from part of a world that now exists for others. And what I really want to be clear here is we're in the 21st century now, and we are at 2020, and we have got a significant divide that is occurring within our systems. So I started researching the digital divide, and in particular, my focus was on how do we conquer this? What can we do? So in study one, I did a series of 3 studies, and I surveyed 409 students. These were first-year business students based at regional university and at an urban university. The survey questions were really looking at their self-reported school experiences and their self-reported digital skills. Now, the majority of students had access to a laptop at school. We also had a number of students that had access to a school learning management system. There were some concerns when you look at only 26% of students who did not have access to a personal computer. So you could see that there were some difficulties arising in regards to access. But then when we started breaking it down and we looked at, the question was, my school had a learning management system. And you could see that students that were from rural schools, and the orange is yes, they did. You could see that there was a significant difference between the access that rural students had to what urban students had, as well as regional cities. We also saw a significant difference between first in family and those who were not in first in family. First in family refers to the first in their family to come to university. And then again, we've got significant differences within the socio-economic status and within state schools. There are some differences, but not too much. So then the next question I asked was, did they feel they were well prepared by their school for university study? And this was the graphic here that I found quite surprising. 39% of students from rural communities said that they were not sure or that they disagreed that they were well prepared for university studies. When we broke it down to schools, you can see that 33% within state schools said that they weren't prepared. Very similar, very closely followed by the Catholic schools. And with independents, you can see that that wasn't so much, with only 11%. But once we started separating the students that didn't have access to a learning management system or a digital curriculum, meaning that digital technologies were not embedded across their secondary school, and we asked them, were they prepared to study in a digital learning environment when they got to university? And 76% of these students said no. They said no, they disagreed or they were not sure. So we broke it down further, and we developed 5 different groups from the feedback. And we had group 1, which were from rural, state and low socioeconomic. So we had the 5 groups going across. But for this particular presentation, I just wanted to focus on 3 groups. We had group 4. These students were generally based in urban areas. They they came from families with a high socioeconomic status. They were not first in family to attend university. They tended to have access to a learning management system. And then over here, we had the rural state schools who had low socio-economic backgrounds. Only 44% of these students had access to a learning management system at school. And then over here, we had a group of students who were rural students from non-state school. And what was surprising here is this group did have access to a learning management system. However, though they may have had access, not every subject in their school used it. So we asked the students to identify or self-report their literacies. And we can see quite clearly here in this yellow line, group 4 performed quite well. But these areas here, this where they came to posting, developing, creating blogs, using Adobe, those more difficult digital skills, you can see we had quite a significant drop within that second group, as well as with group first. But group 4 didn't have as much of as a dive in that. So we found it surprising that these rural state, non-state schools still perform, well, self-reported as not being proficient. But when we broke it down further, we looked at their background with generally low socioeconomic status. There were lots of other factors that were involved within that. So then with the other 2 studies that I did, I did digital tests and case studies. And I just want to show you some of the comments. And what I've done here is I've separated it into 3 different groups. So I've got the state school digital experience. This is the experience that the students shared with me. And you can see that a lot of the state schools were that the school issued laptops weren't of a good quality. They were quite poor in quality. That undergrades would pull off the keys and they were falling apart in some schools, and in this particular school they weren't even able to run Windows properly. And then in another school, this student here had to book a computer lab in order to go in to use the digital devices, and it was never available when she needed it because it had to be so far in advance. This isn't a reflection on the schools, if I could say. This is a reflection on the funding models that we have in place. And then we look at the digital school, the Catholic schools digital experience. And in this area here, it appeared from the students that were in this study. Remember, I didn't go to the schools and I didn't check with the schools. This is what was the experiences of the students. And they spoke about the fact that the use of the laptop was seen as a privilege, that they were told to handwrite as opposed to using the computer. They generally used the computer as a word processing for their assignments. And so it was quite a jump for this student, where the school didn't use technologies at all, not interactive web sites or anything like that. And then we get to the private school digital experiences within the study. And here, every classroom had a smart board or a smart TV, and all of the lessons were run through it. And yes, some kids did pull the keys off their laptops, but the schools quickly fixed that. They had an LMS, a learning management system, that everything was run through. All of the classwork was shared on it. And it was the same sort of setup as what was occurring at JCU at the university. The teachers would use a smartboard to write on and then upload it to their shared drive. The teachers would put up documents to their LMS for students to read. And what was interesting, their digital diary was automatically updated by the teachers. Now, this is also happening in some of the state schools as well, but as a rule, it's generally a private school experience. And then we came to what was quite clear with the disadvantage that the Bring Your Own Device scheme was bringing about. And this is an area that needs further research. So I'm just going by what was told to me. And this student I thought was a really poignant example, where she had to use a school-issued laptop because her family couldn't afford to buy her one. And so she felt she was at a disadvantage because if the laptop wasn't working within her classroom, she wasn't able to participate in any of the online learning activities that were occurring. So it was really quite a significant disadvantage.
Kerry, can I just jump in there? You've spoken about the sort of reason behind that disparity is funding. So in the immediate response to the COVID-19 disruption, state governments were scrambling to get online learning systems up and running. Do you think that their priority should instead have been to ensure that all students, especially those in rural and remote communities, first of all, actually had access to digital tools?
In a perfect world, yes, that should have been the case. However, are our state schools appropriately funded? If our state schools had been appropriately funded, those resources would have been in place. We've got teachers who are working incredibly hard to meet the needs of their students, to ensure their students are ready for a digital environment. And certainly, looking at some of the news reports, you know, that first week when Ed Queensland went online, and that first day where everything there was the system broke down. There was an opinion piece in the Australian where they spoke about how how appalling it is that this occurred, and at these other schools there was no issue. And then I looked at the schools that they were referring to, and they were all high-end private schools in urban areas who had already had the systems in place. So therefore, it was an easy step for them.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks. So I used a digital testing platform then with the students after the interview. And what I was looking at here was I gave them a series of tasks that they had to do, and the platform actually did the times on task. It measured their mouse movements, their mouse clicks, in order to do the 5 tasks that were allocated to them. And what I found was that the 5 top performers all had access to a learning management system or a digital curriculum. So they all came from schools that had those kind of resources. And what was so surprising in this was that the top performers included participants from rural state schools who had developed a digital curriculum using a shared drive as opposed to the learning management system. So within Ed Queensland now, they do have a Blackboard system, but these particular schools had developed their own kind of mini learning management system, and they had embedded digital technologies throughout all of their subjects. So what I can see from this is that the disadvantage could be overcome no matter where a student was situated, whether they came from a low socioeconomic background, whether they came from a rural school. If they had access to a digital curriculum, that disadvantage was overcome, and they would be more likely to be digitally fluent. So from the school, the students reported school identity, I developed this, what I refer to as a technical identity of schools. And I'm saying here that if a school has connectivity, if it has inclusion, if there is that pedagogical practice and influence, those opportunities for practice, for digital skills development, and that the technologies are applied in a variety of contexts, then those schools were more likely to have students that were in the top performing groups. So you can see the group 1. Group 2 had access to parts of these, but not all. And group 3, the group 3 didn't have access to a lot of this and really didn't perform well. However, a lot of those students were also mature age students that didn't come through a school system when laptops were available. So what I found from this research was that there were 4 keys for digital fluency. And in order for digital fluency to be met within a school or within a university, all of these 4 things had to occur. We needed to have 1, access and experience. We needed to have opportunities to learn within a digital curriculum. We needed experiences in creating, not just consuming digital knowledge. And we needed to construct the digital identity through digital immersion. And this is where I think COVID was allowing us to do that. You know, for instance, within our college at the university, we have immersed all of our students now within a digital environment. And look, a number of students are struggling with it. We haven't had all 4 keys in place for that to work. But then we've got other pockets of practice where students were used to being in a digital learning environment and therefore have made that adaptation quite easily.
Kerry, can I just jump in? We've actually just got a question from the audience. I'll just read it to you now. Do you see handheld devices with free Fluency apps as a solution to the biased access to digital media?
Handheld devices, look, I think it's really got to be all subjects have to be immersed within that. So if a student's going to go into a subject to learn something, that I don't see the digital curriculum being one subject separate. It's got to be embedded across. So I'm not sure how a handheld device would meet that need, because there's only so much you could do within a handheld device. Whereas a computer, a laptop, you've got access to a lot more.
Yeah, and just one more question from Lynn. What about professional development of teachers and staff to help them come up to speed?
Yes, that is imperative. And look, that is certainly occurring in some areas, but it's very important that that we provide those professional development opportunities so that students, that staff are aware of how to teach within a digital environment, what types of learning technologies to use. And what we don't want to see people using technology just because it's there. There's got to be a reason for it. So you might be in a class, for instance, where you're not going to use it, and that's okay, as long as at some stage within that subject, you do bring it in. But that professional development and access to IT support is so important. You know, when I was teaching online, you kind of went into a class and you just held your breath that it was going to work, because if it didn't work, you needed to know that there was someone you can call to say, hey, this isn't working, and get it going. And you needed to have a plan B in place. So there's all these different stages that you need to go through, and that would certainly be part of the professional development for teachers.
Thanks, Kerry.
So I see that the cycle of digital fluency is to me like the development of a language. You need to experience it. You need to be immersed. You need to practice. And practice therefore gains proficiency. And then you move on to fluency. But you don't just stay at fluency. This isn't a static. You can't just say, oh, I'm fluent now. I can just sit back and relax. Not going to happen, because technology is changing so fast that you will easily forget how something works, or it's changed completely. Therefore, this is a never-ending cycle, really, that we're in.
So, Kerry, just on that, I'm sure there's people in the audience that are sitting here now. If we take it away from just an educational focus, what can people at home do to stay digitally fluent as these technologies change? I
really do think that we need to put ourselves out there and engage as much as possible. One of the questions I asked within the study was, what did you do what did they do to troubleshoot any problems? And the digitally fluent student would say to me, oh, I went into settings and I knew where to go on the computer to do things. And then if I couldn't fix it, I would go to Google and I'd just troubleshoot it from there. Then when I asked the digital literate person and said, well, you know, what do you do when you've got a problem? It was, oh, I go and ask my brother, or I'll ask my friend who's really good with IT. It's about extending ourselves. And we have to keep up with it. We have to continually keep up with what's going on within the world, particularly now that we're moving to that artificial intelligence, etc. So education post-COVID, to me and to all of us, we now recognise that change is imperative. And I really believe that an urgent review of school resourcing, and I know that, you know, there's a current review underway of school funding, but we really need to be looking at how are we resourcing our schools? What types of how are we going to roll out a digital curriculum across all our schools equally? How are we going to ensure that all schools have access to the devices that they need, to the curriculum? And what kind of ITC supports are we going to have in our schools?
So, Kerry, just to extend on that, it's interesting you've just put there is no going back. So we have a question from Pauline. She said, do you think that the need to be online with COVID has also shown the need for teaching to be more explicit in terms of subject content and specific to navigating around the subject being taught?
Yes. We can't just throw students in like we did, for instance, in some of our programs and say, well, off you go, work it out yourselves. We have to have instructions there on how to engage with the learning material, how much also to break it down to how much focus needs to be on a particular area. So we do things like, we want you to read this and then we want you to watch this video. It needs to be that structured when we're looking at a digital curriculum in that space. I would love to see a model going forward where we do have those flipped classrooms, and I know we don't like talking too much about it, but more of a blended classroom where students can view a video on a recorded lecture topic by the teacher and then come into school ready to workshop those concepts that they've done.
Excellent. Thanks.
Thank you. And there really is no going back. We need to start considering what we need to do within our own educational practice regarding building digital fluency. And it comes down to, and one of the things that I really want to make a mention here, and thank you, Pauline, for bringing it up, is that awareness of experience. We need to know where our students sit before we start developing the digital curriculum program. So if we've got students who don't have broadband at home, don't have access to any data, what kind of experiences are they going to then have? How do we go about then immersing them in a digital environment? So we need to be very aware of where the student sits and then build from there. And it's going to be difficult. How do we manage that if a student doesn't have data at home? What I know a lot of people have been doing during COVID is providing internet dongles and data for their students. But how feasible is that to continue?
So I'll just jump in again, Kerry. We've got a question from Terry here. Do you think that in terms of upgrading and bringing education provision into the digital age, I guess, do you think there's a set model that would suit all year levels, or do you think that's specific to certain year levels or certain disciplines?
I think it's across every discipline, but I do think it's different for year levels. And when we look at what's occurring within our primary schools, where we've got students now in primary school who are learning coding and who are immersed within a digital environment, that will be a very different cohort to the cohort that we currently have in our secondary schools and that we have at our universities. So that could bring about significant change. That could actually be the digital native in the making. However, we're going to have those disadvantage indicators that need to be overcome. So that immersion within the digital environment, the opportunities need to be there for practice and support. So if a student is having problems with access, they need to know that they can ring someone and get that support for that. And this then instills that resilience and the proficiency for them to become digitally fluent.
Kerry, just before you go on, I do have another question. Apologies for interrupting you, but we've got some really good ones coming through now. This one from Peter. It just really touched on the essence of everything that you've been talking about. Why do you think that digital fluency, competency and skill is so underappreciated in society at the moment? And Peter suggested that, does the ease of social media apps like Facebook, Twitter minimize its significance?
Yes, well, I think because people see their kids on Facebook and on Twitter and on TikTok doing videos, and they just assume, oh, these kids, they are so good at technology. And they are, they are, but they're good at the consuming of digital technologies. They're digital literate, but they're not fluent, because then when we put them into a digital environment, they're not necessarily able to move with ease, which is what we really need. I also think that the other factor is, I hear people cheer when a school decides to ban technology. So, you know, there's going to be no phones, there's going to be no technology at school. It's technology-free zone. You can't do that. The world is not a technology-free zone. These kids are then going to move into a workforce where it's going to be an enormous leap for them if they haven't had that exposure before. And I know phones is probably a bad example because they do provide a lot of distractions. But we can't be scared of technology. So there's a lot of focus of predators online, and I think COVID's brought to the fore that, hey, there's a lot of good things going on within our digital environments as well, and we need to really engage with that.
So just building on that there, Kerry, Janice has a question here. What do you recommend that we actually do to train the students to be prepared for this new digital environment?
What do we do is we need to have it there to start with, and we need to then immerse them within that environment. I'm very interested in looking at our students currently, that particularly those that have had a massive leap into the COVID digital environment at university, as to whether their skills have improved. I would expect that they may not be digitally fluent yet, but they're working towards that, because suddenly they're Zooming, they're using Collaborate, the online learning platform. We're not seeing as many issues coming through with people having access to those platforms as we would have previously. So these considerations, to me, is what would build fluency. So we need to start making it our priority. You know, we need to be future-proofing our graduates. And the only way we can do that is if we need to start redressing the digital divide now. And we need to ensure that our graduates, whether they be from school or from university, are responsive to a constantly changing digital environment. COVID has exposed an ever-widening digital divide in our Australian education systems, and now is the time to act. But in order to conquer the digital divide, it will require investment, it will require support, it requires curriculum direction for both sectors. And there is work to be done, and we really need to get started on it. So that is my one message that I want to get across. We can't just sit around thinking about it and talking about it. We need to get investment within the sectors to ensure that this divide is recognised and overcome. So thank you.
Fantastic, Kerry. That's been a wonderful presentation. We do have a fair few questions here, so apologies to people in the audience if I don't get to your question. We do have a bit of a question when we were talking before about phones in classrooms. So Carmen said, how do we adjust for the distraction in classrooms stemming from phones and other devices when they've proven to be detrimental for learning in classrooms?
You know, I know a lot of schools use things like Socrative and those platforms where students use their phones to participate in a poll. You know, those kind of activities really do engage the students. And look, it is very difficult because I know myself when I've been teaching where you've got students texting each other, it really is, and there's no such thing as multitasking. You know, if a student is texting someone else, they're not listening. But we need to be thinking about what kind of parameters we should be putting in place. And I mean, we can't have a poll throughout a whole class, but it is something to consider.
Yeah, we've got an excellent one here from Pauline as well. So Pauline says, you know, as someone who supports students at home and in a tutoring environment, I'm keen to improve my digital fluency. So could you suggest the best quality training, resource, site or course for those of us who want to improve in digital fluency?
Oh, I don't know. To me, it's really about having exposure to different types of platforms, different types of software, to really extend yourself in that way. And look, there are certainly some great MOOCs out there as well that provide programs in digital technologies and learning technology. So I would suggest looking at those.
Excellent. And we do have an interesting one here from Catherine. So obviously the nature of this conversation has been talking about the digital future and whatnot. But where do old school things like, for example, completing activities via handwriting or drawing out mind maps, where do they fit into a digital education?
Oh, see, I think we still need that. We still need to be handwriting. And you know, a lot of students really connect with being able to write things out as opposed to typing. So I don't want everything to move into a digital space. Mm-hmm. When I speak of immersion, I guess I'm saying I don't want our digital technologies to sit completely separate. We still need to be creative in class without using technology as mm-hmm. well. So we don't want technology just for the sake of it, certainly.
Excellent. We've got another great question here from Judy. In your research, Kerry, you were talking about School 1 and School 2 as different scenarios. Do you think that there's a University 1 and a University 2? Or even within universities, do you think that some colleges are in that School 1 category and others are in School 2?
Yes, and that has been very prominent as we've moved to through COVID. In that 1 week that we had, like all educators, we had, for instance, even in my college, we had some courses that were not online at all, that did not use the learning management system, and it's been a massive leap. We're now moving into online exams where everyone is sitting online exams, and we have 15,000 exam sittings coming up within a 10-day period. There is absolute terror amongst a number of students as to how to go about in that environment. We even have some programs where the students have been very specific. They don't want to typewrite their essay, their exam essay. They think by writing, and they want to write. So we've given them that opportunity where they will write it, take a photo of it, and then upload it to the system.
Yeah. Another very interesting one from Peter. He said, "Thank you, Kerry, for the presentation. I must admit there's been a couple of those as well. Do you think that students and staff underestimate the difficulty of the process of becoming digitally fluent? It seems hard to describe the process and baseline skills in digital fluency and scaffolding that may be required."
Yes, it is. It is, because we had a big focus on digital literacy. And digital literacy to me is really a competency. But in order to be fluent, it really is about being able to troubleshoot, being able to create. So I think there's still a heap of work that needs to be done within this space. It hasn't finished at all by any stretch of the imagination, but we really need to start our focus on that. It needs to become our focus.
Thanks, Kerry. There's an interesting one here from Judy, just a comment getting back to what we were talking about, where some people were asking, well, you know, are there some certain apps or, you know, devices where a process I can go through to become more digitally fluent? So Judy said that GoodNotes is a great app for being able to handwrite. At 48, I bought an iPad and am using GoodNotes and have gone completely paperless since having to work from home 2 months ago. So there you go. That answers our question from before. All right. Well, I think I'll close the questions there and say thank you very much, Kerry. That was a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it, and a lot of the comments that were coming through was this really is such a relevant time for this discussion. So also for the audience, thank you very much for who tuned in tonight, and really appreciate your feedback. And we'd also appreciate your feedback once this webinar closes. There'll be a link to a survey. We want to hear what you have to say because we want to continue to deliver interesting and engaging webinars throughout the rest of this series. An email will come tomorrow with you to register for the next webinar on the 11th of June, where we'll have Chris Rains from the College of Healthcare Sciences exploring the impact of COVID-19 on maternal and infant health. There were also some questions that I'll go through once we end the webinar. I might put you on to Kerry to be able to discuss those as a later date. But in the meantime, thank you very much, and we hope to see you again on the 11th of June. Thanks.